Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dominions 5 Strategy. We're going to wrap up our series on Tianqi here by looking at late age Tianqi, the barbarian kings. So story-wise, what's happened here is China has undergone the Mongol Empire. So the Celestial Empire is crumbling. The barbarian Khans have all but destroyed the imperial bureaucracy. The imperial guard is gone. Ancestor worship is rising in prominence, and priest mages are replacing the priests of the bureaucracy. Conscription has also fallen out of use. The eunuchs are gone. So, national features, that's not very informational. That's not very interesting either. Lots and lots of magic. Late-age Tianqi retains the quality of early and middle-age Tianqi of having a lot of magical diversity. However, in a lot of ways, they're very, very different. So let's actually start by looking at the units first. Normally we look at commanders first, but let's look at units. A lot of these units are really familiar. Specifically, they're familiar because they are the same units as early age Tianqi. The footmen, the archers, the heavy footmen with the full scale mail, the medium footmen with protection 11. These are literally Tianqi's early era units. Now, in the late age, they're no longer quite as good because competition has gotten stiffer. There's a lot of crossbows on the field in the late age. There are more high prot units, high protection units in the late age. Overall, this is still a fairly solid roster, but it's nothing like as good as it was by comparison in the early age. And it's not even as good as the middle age because they have forgotten how to use crossbows just when crossbows are becoming really widespread and important to combat the heavy armor. So, for example, this guy, pretty worthless in the late age, to be honest. Slow, no shield, moderate but not exceptional protection. In any major battle in the late age, you are going to be facing crossbows, and these heavy footmen will just get gunned down. Now, these guys are still your bread and butter just because they have an enormous tower shield and defense skill 14. That's still very solid for standard infantry, so recruiting these footmen and potentially medium footmen if you have the extra resources, definitely a good call. Sometimes even heavy footmen with the shields, they're decent chaff. And these infantry, the main use for Tianqi's infantry is, as it always has been, to be really solid chaff. However, late-age Tianqi also has access to these barbarian cavalry. So barbarian horsemen are basically light cavalry but upgraded significantly. They use composite bows, which are still acceptable even in late age. They have high defense skill and they have a lance charge. They also have the pillager ability, which almost never comes into play, but every now and then I guess you want to burn a province down. Barbarian heavy horsemen are really quite good. They're just straight up heavy cavalry, except they also have a composite bow attack. And they only cost 24 recruitment points, which is lower than most heavy cavalry. Why they only cost 24 recruitment points? I'm not entirely sure. But their cost is reasonable. Their attacks are decent. They have multiple attacks. They have a lance charge that does quite a bit of damage. Then they have 2 attacks in melee. They also have the composite bow so they can shoot for a while. Overall, they're very solid. Tianqi's Sacred, the Ancester Vessel, is a frighteningly effective heavy cavalry unit. It's expensive, and it's back up to 46 recruitment points, but they have Spirit Sight, they're Sacred, they have 3 really very solid attacks, and then they have the Howling Bow, and the Howling Bow causes fear to the people it hits. I don't know how the armor negating fear damage works out. I mean, this is just straight up magic damage. That's armor negating. And then in addition, it causes fear. And it forces morale checks. So Ancestor Vessels are not as good as they were in Dominions 4 when fear could stack a lot more, but they're still quite good at routing people. In addition, of course, they're just solid heavy cavalry with solid stats and high protection and high defense and attack skills, and also slightly higher than human HP. So these are good sacreds. You could build a bless on these sacreds. In terms of leadership, you have mounted scouts, which don't have any of the survivals that normal scouts do, but are faster than normal. You've got generals, which are fort recruitment, and they're leadership 80, but you also have Khans, and Khans can be recruited outside forts. They are, of course, slow to recruit because they require 2 recruitment points, but the ability to recruit really good commanders outside forts is pretty solid. I mean, recruiting Khans in provinces while you're building forts, or even just provinces next to a fort while you're recruiting troops. It just means you can get high-quality leadership that gives you morale bonuses and not have to spend fort turns on it, which is a nice little Benny. In terms of mages, you've got the ceremonial master, pardon my tongue stumble, who is just a level 1 priest. You have the Master of the Way. This is the mage that stays the course. Throughout all ages of Tianqi, you always have the Master of the Way. And he's never a great mage, but he's always there to help you along. And he's also a priest mage. So, he's there. He can do some work for you. Then you have these three guys, these three old mages right here. The Ancestor Smith, the Spirit Master, and the Ancestor Guide. And they're actually all very similar. They all have the same cost, 220 gold, and slightly varying amounts of resources. They all have 3 paths, and the only difference is what those paths are. And their randoms are even very, very similar. So you have the Ancestor Smith, who is Earth Death cross path with a random of Air, Astral, Death, or Nature. He's sacred and a priest, and also has a forge bonus of 1. So Death Earth is a great cross path. You can get Death 2. You can't get higher than Earth 2, but having Earth 2 means that you can forge Earth Boots and then forge Dwarven Hammers. You can ratchet yourself up to Earth 4 with Boots and Earth Power and cast all the big Earth spells. There's lots of stuff you can do with Earth. Having Death, the Death Earth cross path allows you to cast Blight. It also opens up a couple of items to forge, like the Shade Mail Halberdian. And with Astral or Air randoms, you can do some fun little things with that. The Spirit Master has the Death Nature cross path, which is what you need for Lamia Queens eventually, although I think it would be hard to boost a Spirit Master up to that level. If you got the Death 2, you would need to boost 3 levels of Nature, so you would need a Tree Lord Staff and then also a Moonvine Bracelet, which I think you're unlikely to get, but it's theoretically possible. But another Priest Mage, Nature Death cross paths, of course Nature 2 is always useful, and the chance of getting Death 2 or of getting Astral. And then you have the Ancestor Guide, who is Air 1 and Death 2, so this is the guaranteed Death 2 guy. He cannot random another level of Death, but he can get Air 2, which can be useful, or he can get Astral, of course. So the interesting thing about these mages is the main differences between them. Their randoms are very, very similar. They've got Nature, Earth, Air, and Astral in some combination. Some of them can random more Death. Some of them can random more Earth or whatever. But the main point is, all these guys, you've got those 4 paths in basically any combination you want. They never go above 2. None of them. You can't ever... these guys are set up so that you can't ever get above 2 in any of these paths. But you get a guaranteed level 2 in any path except Astral. In addition, you have Masters of the Way, who some of those also random Astral. So what that means is, Tianqi can set up small communions, not large communions, not price-efficient communions, but they can set up small communions with mages that don't have all that much by way of upkeep cost, because they're all sacred. And they can use those to boost their Death, their Earth, their Nature, and their Air spells to fairly significant levels. I mean, all you need is 4 slaves to kick you up 2 levels. So then you're at Nature 4, or Death 4, or Earth 4 with this guy, which is a pretty decent ability. Ancestor Smiths, in addition, despite being old, have very, very high attack and defense skills, so even after their old age penalty, they still have pretty high attack and defense skills. So if you absolutely want to, if you absolutely need to, you can lightly thug Ancestor Smiths. I wouldn't really recommend it. Certainly I wouldn't really recommend doing it heavily, but it's a possibility. They're expensive. They're too expensive for my money for doing that. You also do have Celestial Masters. Now, they're capital only recruitment. All of these guys are recruit anywhere. The Celestial Master is capital only and slow to recruit, and this is the weakest they've ever been. Only 4 guaranteed paths plus 1 random. Maximum of 2 Astral. Maximum of 2 in anything, unless they hit the 10% random to get another point of water, but that's only 2.5% of Celestial Masters will be Water 3. You can use them as communion leaders, but to be honest, I don't really think they're worth it. Being slow to recruit, I don't know. I'm not sure I would bother much. You know, you recruit 1 or 2 to have access to water magic in your communions. Or, I mean, I say 1 or 2. You recruit a few. You'll recruit a few. You'll have some of them sight searching. You'll have some of them going around with your armies to give you, if you need guaranteed, if they random, like, higher level air. If you happen to get one that has level air 3 or something, that's one thing. But overall, they're the same price as these 3 guys, the Ancestor Guide, Spirit Master, and Ancestor Smith. And they have more paths. They have 1 extra path, but to my mind, their paths aren't as useful. So, and they're slow to recruit, so you can get 2 Barbarian Mages in the time it takes you to get 1 Celestial Master. So, Late Age Tianqi does have a lot of magical flexibility. I will say they're a pretty big death nation, just because you can get 2 death on Ancestor Smiths, which are probably overall, I would say, the best out of the 3 by a little bit. They're all pretty good. You can get 2 death on Spirit Masters, and of course you're guaranteed death 2 on Ancestor Guides. So you have a lot of death 2 walking around. Death 2 you can, of course, ratchet up to death 3 very easily to summon Mound Fiends. If you take a Death God, you can forge death items to boost them further. You can forge the Skull Face and all that kind of stuff. So you can do most of the stuff that Death wants to do pretty easily. I would recommend taking a Death Pretender with Late Age Tianqi for that reason. You have lots of Death sight searching, so you'll be able to get lots of Death income, and with that you can, you know, boost yourself up to cast the really big spells and to summon Immortals. Speaking of summoning, Late Age Tianqi has basically the same Pretender chassis options. Not the greatest, but not the greatest in terms of Awake Expanders, certainly. But they do have the Earth Serpent, they do have the Dragon King, and they do have the Kami of the Sun. So those are 3 fairly viable options. They also have the Raven of the Underworld, which is not a viable expander option, but kind of cool. Corpse Eater, which is a cool little fun ability. It gives you extra hit points for eating corpses. You can keep stacking it. Unfortunately, it's not permanent hit points. There was a time when it was permanent hit points, but that got changed. It's only current hit points. So over time, your HP will drift back towards your normal maximum. But, as I was saying, in terms of summoning, Late Age Tianqi does have some of the national Tianqi spells. They have Celestial Servant. They have Call Ancestor to summon Ancestral Spirits. Celestial Servant is still garbage. I would literally never cast this spell. I mean, maybe if you're besieged and all you have is Earth Gems, and you need all your mages to be summoning something useful, but legitimately, I would rather just summon ogres. Like, Celestial Servants are bad at things, and they also eat a ton. You do have Celestial Hounds, and you have Celestial Soldiers. You don't have the River and Fire Demons, but you do have those, and then you have at level 7, Wrath of the Ancestors. Wrath of the Ancestors can definitely be fun, depending on what bless you take, because, as I said before, Ancestral Spirits do carry weapon blesses just fine. Now, of course, blessing them is a little bit tricky for you, because you don't have any high-level mages. If you take a Celestial Master leading a Communion, you can easily boost him up to Holy 3 in order to cast Bless spells. Same with any Ancestor Guide, Spirit Master, or Ancestor Smith who is leading a Communion. If they have Astral, you can do that with them. Oh, also, the Astral Earth Crosspath on Ancestor Smiths will allow you to forge Crystal Matrixes and stuff like that. Plus Astral Boosters. If you probably have to get an Astral Random Celestial Master to start breaking into Astral Boosters, then you can slap them on Ancestor Smiths to help forge further Astral Boosters and Crystal Gear. But you can get Crystal Shields, you can get Crystal Matrixes and Slave Matrixes, all that kind of stuff, so you can get into Communions pretty solidly. Celestial Soldiers remain a good summon. Wrath of the Ancestors remains a good summon. So in terms of blesses, since the Ancestors can carry blesses, there's a couple of funny things you can do with them that aren't terribly efficient but are hilarious. There's a bless called Death Explosion. 5 fire bless points. When your blessed unit dies, it explodes and does 10 armor piercing damage and 5 AoE around itself. what you can do with that is, now, before I say this, you have to bear in mind, all of your mages are also sacred. So if you take this bless, your mages will also be exploding. But what you can do is you can take Death Explosion and then Fire and Shock Resistance, which gives you 10 fire resistance. And that, on average, negates the Death Explosion. You can layer a little bit more fire resistance on your mages and stuff, and then send your Ancestral Spirits out, and they will die very quickly because they're weak and they have little HP. But because they're ethereal, they'll probably last long enough to get in among the enemy troops. And then they start exploding and they do damage, and, you know, it can be funny. It can even be effective. If you have an enemy who's relying on large numbers of chaff units, Death Explosion, you know, bomb ghosts, ghost bombs, they can do a decent job against chaff. I wouldn't depend on it. I certainly wouldn't, but it's a funny little thing. Another thing you can do with them is charged bodies, because when somebody hits you, they will be blasted with lightning, and if you take shock resistance, then on average you will not be hit by lightning. So you can take like major shock resistance, charged bodies, maybe you take fire shock as well or something. What you want, though, is you want to find, in my mind, bless that works for the Ancester Vessels as well as your ghosts. And the Ancester Vessels, of note, these Howling Bows do carry weapon blesses, because they're not native, they're not inherent ranged weapons like Breath, they're just regular weapons. So if you're firing a Howling Bow at someone, they will be hit by any weapon blesses you take. So to my mind, one of the best blesses you can take that works on both is Thunder Weapons. Because Thunder Weapons will make sure that your Ancestor Vessels Howling Bows are doing armor-negating damage and stunning people. And it will also mean that your Ancestral Spirits are doing armor-negating damage and stunning people when they touch them. I haven't really thought about which chassis is best for carrying that. Of course, you want one with native air. Jade Emperor might not be a terrible... I hate recommending a Titan. I truly, legitimately do. Flaming weapons wouldn't be awful. Just regular old magic weapons also wouldn't be awful. Although the Howling Bows are already magical, so it would only help in melee with the Ancestral Vessels. Yeah, I would probably try to get Thunder Weapons, to be fully honest. Like, I think that's probably your best bet in terms of weapon. If you want a singular high-level weapon bless, that's probably your best bet. And so then you take, like... Who's got air out of all these guys? You could take the Kami of Storms, I guess? No, don't take the Kami of Storms. He's so expensive and he's so worthless because he has Protection 3. Yeah, he's shock resistant, can fly, storm immunity, all that stuff, but the fact of the matter is, Protection 3 plus 98 hit points, he just dies if you try to expand with him. If you take a Titan, Kami of the Sun is by far your best option. So yeah, like Celestial Dragon or Dragon King. Celestial Dragon for this, because he has air. And you take Thunder Weapons. And like 5 or 6 Dominion. You have neutral scales at that point. I would probably also take some Astral and get a Mage Bless, because all of your mages are sacred, and they can all definitely benefit from a Bless. Another strategy might be to take Unaging as a Bless, because that will help. It should, if it's working as it should, help your Ancestor Guides not be so old. And having them not be old, having these guys not be old, will be a lot better. I tend to refer to all these guys just as Ancestor Guides, because Ancestor Guides are the Death 2, which I think is really handy, or you can call them all Ancestor Smiths, but basically they're all the same guy. I mean, they're all the same cost, they all have the same number of paths, they all pick from the same path spread. The only difference is which one they have at 2. I mean, really, because any of these guys can get any combination of paths, but they can just never get above 2 in any of them. And so the one that they already have as 2 is not available for a random, but all the others are all available for a random. So the only thing you're actually choosing when you pick one of these guys is what you want to have at level 2. Earth, nature, or death. And everything else is random. I mean, they're the same mage, is what I'm getting at. They're just the same mage, just with different level 2 paths. So, in terms of overall strategy for Tianqi, like I said, I think Thunder Weapons is probably a really solid pick. If you don't want an Incarnate Bless, which is perfectly reasonable, there's no reason you really have to. I would probably recommend still an Awake Expander, just because, yeah, you have decent expansion troops, but especially in the late age, you're going to be fighting people who have troops that do well at killing yours, because, for example, your heavy horsemen are relying on their protection mainly for protection against crossbows, and crossbows will still massacre them. And you're competing against nations that have really, really strong blood endgames. And you have death as an endgame. That's fine. You also have astral magic available, but you don't have any blood and you don't have any really high-level paths natively. So your endgame is a little more complicated than the endgame of, say, Bogarus, who just uses blood and all their many cross paths to do blood things and destroys the world with astral corruption. The Earth Serpent is definitely the most efficient Awake Expanding monster you have. And you can just give him Earth 6 if you're worried for hard skin. And then you're positive on scales. And you can take Misfortune in order to get more scales. You can trash your temperature to get more scales, you know, all that kind of stuff. In terms of positive scales that you want some resources, because Ancester Vessels do cost resources. You would probably also like some order, because your cavalry do have fairly high recruitment point cost, even though your infantry do not. And then, of course, you want growth. I would also get magic, or at least strongly consider it, because you don't have any really efficient, cost-efficient researchers. I mean, your sacred mages here don't have exorbitant upkeep costs, but they're not cheap. I mean, they're not cheap mages. They're fairly expensive mages. So having some magic in order to help them would probably be a good idea. So, like, a couple points of magic, maybe Dominion. I probably want to stick with Dominion 5. And then, like, Productivity 2. That might be the kind of thing I go for. I don't think you have enough points to really squeeze out much order. If you felt daring, you could drop down to Growth 2 to get a point of order, but I wouldn't. I would stick with Growth 3. I feel like Growth 3 should be a default, just because Growth has such a powerful effect over the long term. Dropping down to Growth 1 or 2 is kind of accepting a handicap, to be fully honest, unless you have a really, really good reason for it. Like, if you're planning to lean hard on extremely heavily blessed sacreds and just rush somebody. You could take the Kami of the Sun. There's no reason you couldn't do that. The bless that you take for that is something like Fire Shield or Awe. Well, she doesn't need Awe because she already has Awe 3. With her, I mean, I did Fire Shield Fate Weaving when I was testing her out. And that seemed to work pretty well, to be honest. It leaves you well negative on points here, so you have to ditch some of your scales. You actually have to ditch a lot of your scales to do that on Tianqi, but something worth thinking about, possibly. Beyond that, I wouldn't really pick any of the Titans. Celestial Carp is garbage, as always. Nyorai is also pretty garbage. Basically, they're just all too expensive. I mean, that's the Titan problem. They're just all too expensive for what they do. Now, I think you probably can justify taking a Rainbow on Late Age Tianqi. If you want a big bless for your Ancester Vessels and your Ghosts and all that, and your Celestial Soldiers, of course. They are also sacred. Or you could take an Immobile. An Awake Immobile wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't recommend the Fountain of Blood, but the Oracle could be pretty solid. Or the Statue of War, depending on what bless strategy you want. Like I said, I have not played Late Age Tianqi too much, so I don't feel terribly comfortable giving a whole lot of advice on Pretender design. I don't feel like you need fire much. I just don't feel like fire is very valuable, to be honest. That's one problem I have with the Kami of the Sun. She relies on fire, and fire is not a path that a lot of nations need. So, Yeah, I'm still kind of leaning Celestial Dragon, to be honest. You can cast Personal Luck on yourself pretty soon, and that will help. You start off with Natural Protection 17, which ain't bad. And you have multiple attacks plus a poisonous gas. So with a little bit of a bless, you could do fine. Of course, you could take the Dragon King if you wanted to take Quickness, but I wouldn't honestly take Quickness. It's very expensive, and it's not going to help your Sacreds all that much. So I would probably, if I was picking a dragon, I would go Dragon King, and I would go Thunder Weapons and Scales. That's probably my strategy if I'm naming a strategy. Like, this looks pretty good to me. You would want more Astral probably, actually, so let's kick it up to 4 Astral. Having Astral, of course, means that you can't risk this guy in big late-game battles. But by the time the late game rolls around, I would just retire him to a happy little retirement researching and forging things. Arcane Finesse could be pretty solid for you, especially because you may be using a lot of Shadow Blast in combat with your Ancestor Guides, and that will benefit from the Magic Penetration. Arcane Command could be good if you plan to summon a lot of Celestial Soldiers. Magic Resistance is always a solid bless. You could stack up +3 Magic Resist, which would be pretty solid, or you could increase your combat range for your spells. Any of those Astral Blesses would be good. If you wanted to kick it up to 6 Astral, you could also take Twist Fate, which will protect against the first successful attack, or Fate Weaving. I would not take Luck or Ethereal. The problem with Luck is, well, actually, the problem with Luck is that it costs you a ton of points because you have to take Luck, which means you have to tank something else in order to afford it. Because you would need 8 Astral to get it. It's so expensive. Yeah, that's probably a bridge too far. If you want Luck, you pretty much have to take the Oracle. And then it would be like the Oracle with Luck and Frost Weapons, which does cold damage. I don't remember, is the cold damage from Frost Weapons armor negating? I do not remember that. But I mean, you could take Luck and Frost Weapons if you wanted to. Like, no one would stop you. It wouldn't be terribly effective, probably, but no one would stop you. I would go with the Thunder Weapons Dragon, and then some relatively minor Astral Bless. You don't really need magic weapons because your Sacreds already have magic ranged weapons, and your Ghosts, of course, have magic weapons. So if it was me, I'd probably just stack Magic Resistance. Just make them harder to stop. Make your Ghosts harder to banish. That would kick your Magic Resistance up to 17 for the Ancestor Vessels, and for the Ancestral Spirits, it would push it up to, I forget exactly what, but something fairly high, so they'd be hard to banish. So that would be my Bless strategy, probably, and then just, yeah, roll on like that. I would go Heat instead of Cold for mobility reasons, and then, yeah, like 5 Dominion and then 2 other scales here somewhere. Probably Magic. It's okay to leave these neutral. You could use them, but it's not terribly necessary because your Ancestor Vessels do at least cost fewer resources than recruitment points. Your Barbarian Heavy Horse require more resources, but you can still recruit a reasonable number of them with 0 productivity. You should probably do some tests on your own if you're really interested. Figure out exactly how many more troops 1 or 2 productivity gets you. I have not done that test for Tianqi, for late age Tianqi yet, full disclosure, but it will be interesting to see. But I think getting some magic is really useful because that will make your Masters of the Way research at 11 points, and your Smiths here, these guys, research at 15, which is, at 15 points, I would probably be recruiting primarily them, and very few, if any, Masters of the Way. So, in any case, thanks for watching. So, you know, just as the final wrap-up, Death and Earth, primarily. Some Communion ability. It's, of course, easier if you find an Independent, which are fairly common, but you can do it natively in a pinch, and you can push yourself up to level 4 in any of these paths, nature, earth, death, any of those 3. You can also push yourself up fairly high in astral if you want to, and that can be very useful come late game, because astral has some very, very powerful buff spells and such. You can also get yourself up to level 2 in air fairly easily and cheaply, which means that late age Qianqi can cast Fog Warriors pretty easily, and they can big spells like that, Storm, Wrathful Skies if you feel lucky. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Next time, in terms of nations, I'm not sure what nation we're going to go for next time. We may start on the pop kill nations. Yeah, I think I might do that. I think I might start pop kill next time. So, look forward to that. Thank you all once again, and I will see you in the next video.